The late afternoon sun hung low over the city, painting the cracked asphalt of the gas station lot in hues of gold and orange. The air was thick with the sharp tang of gasoline and the distant hum of traffic along the nearby highway. Pumps hissed and clicked, and the convenience store's neon sign flickered, advertising cold drinks and lottery tickets. Amid the everyday rhythm, Jamal Carter, a black man in his mid-40s, stood beside his weathered sedan, the nozzle in hand as he refueled. His gray sweatshirt was slightly faded, his khakis creased from a long day, and his sneakers bore the dust of city streets. His face was calm, his eyes sharp with a quiet intensity, though a faint weariness lingered, a silent acknowledgement of the countless times he'd navigated spaces where his presence was questioned. Jamal was on his way home after a meeting, his briefcase resting in the passenger seat, filled with notes for a new role he'd soon assume. His son, Khalil, was at home, probably practicing his saxophone, the notes drifting through their apartment, a melody inspired by the jazz festivals they attended together. The thought of Khalil's music brought a small smile to Jamal's lips as he watched the pump's numbers tick upward, the tank nearly full. The gas station was busy, cars pulling in and out, drivers casting quick glances as they hurried through their routines. Jamal barely noticed the police cruiser that rolled into the lot, its tires crunching on loose gravel, until it stopped a few pumps away. Two officers stepped out, their boots heavy on the pavement. Officer Reynolds, a white man in his 50s with a grizzled face and a badge that caught the sunlight, scanned the lot with a practiced eye. His partner, Officer Malone, younger and broad-shouldered, followed, his hand resting on his radio. The air shifted, the casual chatter of the lot softening as eyes turned toward the officers. Jamal finished refueling, replacing the nozzle with a soft click. He was reaching for his receipt when Reynolds' voice cut through the hum of the pumps, sharp and commanding. "You there?" Reynolds called, his tone laced with authority. "Step away from the vehicle." Jamal paused, turning slowly, his hand still on the pump. The sun cast long shadows, leaving him exposed in its glare. His heart quickened, but his face remained steady, his eyes meeting Reynolds's without flinching. "Me?" Jamal asked, his voice calm but edged with caution. "Yeah, you," Reynolds said, striding closer, his boots thudding. "We got a report of a suspicious individual matching your description. Let's see some ID." Jamal's brow furrowed, his gaze flicking to the cruiser, then back to Reynolds. "Suspicious?" he said evenly. "I'm just getting gas. Who reported this?" Reynolds's lips curled into a smirk, his eyes narrowing. "Don't get mouthy. ID now." The other drivers paused, some lingering by their cars, others pulling out phones, their tiny red lights blinking as they recorded. Jamal felt the weight of their stares, the familiar sting of being singled out. He'd been here before, too many times. The receipt fluttered in his hand, the ink smudging under his tightening grip. He took a slow breath, grounding himself. "I'm just heading home," Jamal said, his voice steady. "Got my receipt right here. I'm not causing trouble." Malone stepped forward, his hand now on his baton, his posture tense. "You resisting, sir? That's not gonna end well for you." The word resisting hung in the air, sharp and loaded. Jamal's jaw tightened, his mind racing. He knew the script, how quickly a routine stop could spiral. The sun seemed hotter now, its glare reflecting off Reynolds' badge, highlighting the power imbalance etched into this moment. The onlookers' murmurs grew louder, a mix of unease and curiosity, but no one stepped forward. "I'm not resisting," Jamal said, his voice low but firm. "I'm asking why I'm being stopped." Reynolds' smirk faded, replaced by a scowl. "You don't ask questions. ID or you're coming with us." Jamal's hand moved slowly to his wallet, careful not to startle them. The leather was worn, a gift from Khalil years ago, embossed with his initials. He handed over his driver's license, Reynolds snatching it with a flick of his wrist, his eyes scanning the card as if searching for a lie. Malone stood closer now, his baton tapping lightly against his thigh, a subtle threat. "Stay put," Reynolds ordered, stepping back to the cruiser to run the ID. Malone remained, his gaze fixed on Jamal, his fingers twitching near his radio. The phones kept recording, their whispers a low hum against the distant roar of a passing truck. The air was heavy, the warmth of the afternoon now stifling, pressing against Jamal's skin. Minutes dragged, each one heavier than the last. Jamal stood still, the receipt crumpled in his hand, his briefcase a silent witness in the car. He thought of Khalil, waiting at home, probably checking the clock between saxophone riffs. The thought steadied him, kept his anger in check. Reynolds returned, his face harder now, his eyes glinting with something Jamal couldn't quite read. "Got a record?" Reynolds asked, though it wasn't a question. "You look like someone we've picked up before." Jamal's eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed calm. "No record. I'm clean. Can I go now?" Malone chuckled, a low mocking sound. "Not yet. We're gonna need to search that car. Could be anything in there." Jamal's grip on the receipt tightened, the paper tearing slightly. "It's my car. Just my briefcase, some papers. I'm not a suspect." "Open it," Reynolds snapped, his hand resting on his holster now, the gesture unmistakable. The onlookers' whispers turned to gasps, phones angling closer. Jamal felt the heat rising in his chest, the injustice burning, but he kept his movements slow, deliberate. He opened the car door, revealing the briefcase, a water bottle, and a folded jacket. "See," Jamal said, his voice steady but laced with defiance. "Just work stuff." Reynolds didn't respond, his eyes flicking to the briefcase, then back to Jamal. "You're still coming with us," he said. "Suspicious behavior's enough for a detainment." The words hit like a fist. Jamal's breath caught, his mind racing. He hadn't done anything, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved an inch without their say-so. But he knew how suspicious could mean anything they wanted. The onlookers' murmurs grew louder, a man's voice calling out, "He's just getting gas." But Reynolds ignored him, grabbing Jamal's arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. "Hands behind your back," Reynolds ordered, pulling out handcuffs. The metal glinted in the sunlight, cold and unyielding. Malone stepped closer, his baton now in hand, his eyes daring Jamal to move. Jamal stood still, his heart pounding, his thoughts on Khalil. He let them cuff him, the metal biting into his wrists, the click echoing in the afternoon air. The onlookers' phones kept recording, their voices rising in protest, but the officers didn't waver. Reynolds shoved Jamal toward the cruiser, the receipt falling to the asphalt, trampled underfoot. As they pushed him into the back seat, the cruiser's interior smelled of stale air and vinyl, the seat cold against his skin. The door slammed shut, the sound final, cutting him off from the lot. Through the window he saw the faces, angry, scared, helpless, watching as the cruiser pulled away. The gas station faded, the city's golden light blurring into streaks as they drove toward the precinct. Inside the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow over gray walls and scuffed floors. The air was thick with the scent of ink and sweat. Jamal sat in a holding room, his hands still cuffed, his wallet and phone on a table across from him. Reynolds and Malone stood by the door, their voices low as they spoke to a sergeant, a white man with a clipboard and a tired frown. "He was acting suspicious," Reynolds said, his tone clipped. "Matched a description. Got defensive when we asked for ID." The sergeant glanced at Jamal, his eyes cold, assessing. "Run his prints," he said. "Let's see who we're dealing with." Jamal sat silently, his gaze fixed on the table, his mind working. He knew this could stretch into hours, maybe days. He thought of Khalil, alone at home, the saxophone silent now. The thought was a knife, twisting in his chest, but it also fueled him, kept his resolve firm. The sergeant returned, his clipboard now filled with notes. "No record," he said, his tone grudging. "But we're holding him for obstructing an investigation. Book him." Jamal's eyes flicked up, meeting his. "I didn't obstruct," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. "I complied fully. Check the videos. People were recording." Reynolds's face reddened, his hand twitching toward his belt. "You don't call the shots here," he snapped. "You're lucky we're not charging you with more." The sergeant waved him off, his eyes narrowing at Jamal. "You'll get your phone call," he said. "Sit tight." They left him in the room, the door locking with a heavy thud. Jamal leaned back, the cuffs digging into his wrists, the chair creaking under his weight. The fluorescent lights buzzed, the clock on the wall ticking slowly, each second a reminder of the injustice unfolding. He closed his eyes, picturing Khalil's face, his son's music, the way he'd hug him when he got home. That image kept him grounded, kept the anger from consuming him. Hours passed, the night deepening outside. The precinct grew quieter, the hum of activity fading. Jamal's phone buzzed suddenly, the screen lighting up with a call. The sergeant, passing by, glanced at it, his frown deepening. He picked it up, answering with a curt, "Who's this?" Jamal watched, his expression unreadable as the sergeant's face changed. First confusion, then shock, then a flicker of unease. He muttered something, hung up, and unlocked the door, gesturing for Reynolds and Malone to enter. "Who are you?" the sergeant demanded, his voice sharp but unsteady. Jamal met his gaze, his voice calm, almost soft. "Jamal Carter. Just a guy trying to get home to his kid." The sergeant shook his head, holding up the phone. That was the mayor's office. Said you're expected at a swearing-in tomorrow. Care to explain? Jamal's lips curved into a faint smile, the first crack in his stoic facade. I'm the new police commissioner, he said simply. Appointed last week. Ceremonies tomorrow. The room went silent, the air heavy with the weight of his words. Reynolds's face paled, his hand dropping from his belt. Malone's eyes widened, his baton slipping back into its holster. The sergeant's clipboard trembled slightly, his authority crumbling under the revelation. Commissioner? Reynolds stammered, his voice cracking. You're the police commissioner? Jamal nodded, his gaze steady. Check my ID again. It's all there. Jamal Carter, your new boss. And you just arrested me for getting gas. The sergeant fumbled with the wallet, pulling out the license, his eyes scanning it as if it might reveal a different truth. But there it was, in black and white. He looked at Reynolds, then Malone, his face a mix of anger and panic. Uncuff him, he snapped. Now. Malone hesitated, then moved forward, his hands shaking as he unlocked the cuffs. The metal fell away, leaving red marks on Jamal's wrists. He rubbed them slowly, his eyes never leaving Reynolds's. The officer looked away, his bravado gone, his badge suddenly feeling heavier. I didn't know, Reynolds muttered, his voice barely audible. It was just protocol. Protocol. Jamal said, his voice low but cutting. You profiled me for nothing. Searched me for nothing. Cuffed me for nothing. Because of how I look. That's not protocol. That's prejudice. The sergeant stepped forward, his tone conciliatory. Mr. Carter, we're sorry. This was a mistake. A mistake. Jamal interrupted, standing now, his presence filling the room. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. You chose to see me as a threat. You chose to ignore the truth. And how many others have you done this to? How many don't have a title to make you listen? The officers stood frozen, their faces a mix of shame and fear. The precinct's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that seemed to underline the moment's gravity. Jamal picked up his wallet, his phone, moving with deliberate calm. You'll hear from me, he said, his voice steady. Not for revenge. For change. He walked out, the precinct doors swinging shut behind him. The night air was cooler now, the city quieter, the stars faint against the urban glow. Jamal took a deep breath, the weight of the evening settling into his bones. He thought of Khalil, of the promise he'd made to be home. He texted his sister to check on his son, then started walking, his resolve stronger than ever. The next morning, the city hall was alive with anticipation. The swearing-in ceremony was packed, the room filled with officials, community leaders, and residents. The walls were lined with banners celebrating the city's history, and a jazz trio played softly, their notes weaving through the chatter. Jamal stood at the podium, his suit crisp, his tie a deep burgundy that caught the light. Khalil sat in the front row, his eyes wide with pride, a grin splitting his face. Jamal took the oath, his voice steady, his hand on a Bible that had belonged to his grandmother, a community organizer. The crowd applauded, their cheers echoing through the hall. But as he stepped to the microphone, the room fell silent, every eye on him. Last night, Jamal began, his voice clear, resonant. I was arrested. For getting gas. Handcuffed. Searched. Humiliated. Not because of what I did, but because of who I am. A black man in this city. The crowd gasped, murmurs rippling through the room. Khalil's grin faded, his eyes searching his father's face. Jamal continued, his gaze sweeping the audience, unflinching. I'm not here to tell you my story for pity. I'm here to tell you it's not just my story. It's the story of too many in this city. Too many who don't have a title to make people listen. Too many who face the same prejudice, the same injustice, every day. He paused, letting the words settle, the weight of them filling the room. As your police commissioner, I'm making a promise. Not to punish but to change. To reform our department. To train officers to see people, not stereotypes. To hold accountable those who abuse their power. To build a city where every man, woman, and child feels safe, seen, and respected. The crowd erupted, their applause shaking the walls. Khalil clapped hardest, his eyes shining with tears and pride. Jamal stepped down, hugging his son tightly, the jazz trio swelling into a triumphant melody. In the weeks that followed, Jamal's promise took shape. He met with the deputy chiefs in a stark conference room, their faces a mix of deference and unease. The chief, a veteran named Harrison, sat across from him, his voice cautious. Change takes time, Harrison said. Officers follow training. It's how we operate. Training that profiles black men for getting gas? Jamal countered, his tone calm but firm. Training that assumes guilt before evidence? That's not safety. That's oppression. Harrison shifted, but Jamal pressed on. We're starting with anti-profiling policies. Mandatory training, every officer. Bias recognition. De-escalation. Community engagement. And we're auditing every stop, every arrest for patterns of prejudice. No exceptions. Harrison nodded, his resistance fading. Yes, sir, he said quietly. We'll make it happen. Jamal didn't stop there. He formed a civilian oversight board, led by community members, including a pastor from an HBCU-affiliated church and a young activist who'd fought voter suppression. They reviewed complaints, recommended reforms, and held public forums where residents shared their stories. Stories like Jamal's, raw and unfiltered. The forums were packed, the city's black community turning out in droves, their voices rising in a chorus of pain and hope. He also launched a youth outreach program, partnering with community centers to offer music and tech workshops. Khalil joined, his saxophone skills shining in a jazz ensemble, the program's logo, an Afrofuturist design, plastered on banners across the city. The workshops became a beacon, drawing kids from the same streets Jamal had walked. At the precinct, changes were slower but undeniable. Reynolds and Malone faced disciplinary hearings, their actions caught on the onlookers' videos, now viral on X and local news. Jamal didn't push for their firing, he believed in redemption, but he ensured they attended the new training, their badges no longer a shield for bias. The sergeant, humbled, became an advocate for reform, his clipboard now filled with notes on community policing. One evening, Jamal walked past the gas station where he'd been arrested. The lot was quieter now, the pumps gleaming under new lights, the air cooler as fall settled in. He wore his gray sweatshirt, his sneakers scuffing the asphalt, but his stride was lighter, unburdened. A few drivers nodded, recognizing him, their smiles warm with respect. A mural on a nearby wall caught his eye, depicting a black man breaking free from chains, the colors bold against the brick. Below it, in vibrant script, were the words, "Justice fuels us." Jamal stopped, his breath catching. He thought of Khalil, of the city, of the work still ahead. The mural wasn't just art, it was a promise, a reminder that change was a journey, not a moment. Back at the precinct, Jamal stood in his office, overlooking the city. The skyline was his now, not just to lead but to heal. He'd faced the system's worst, its prejudice, its power, and turned it into something better. Not for himself, but for every black man who'd stood at a pump, felt that same chill and deserved more. This story is inspired by real events. Discrimination happens every day. But so does change. Be part of it. They profiled him at the gas station. They underestimated him. But Jamal Carter showed them who he was, and who we can be. This story moved you, share it. Let's spark conversations for justice. Subscribe for more stories that inspire change. Comment below with your experiences or ideas for reform. Together we can build a city, a world where every voice is heard.